My name is Michèle Steinwald. I'm here with Luciana Achugar, the morning after the world premiere of OTRO TEATRO. And I pulled a little French accent there just to make it sound a little different. We're going to talk about the show. Thank you for coming so early in the morning after the premiere.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for asking me to talk, and thank you for presenting the show.
Thanks. Oh. We'll talk about the work, and we'll get sentimental later. We were just talking about how to talk about the show is spoiling the experience for a potential new audience. So I think we're probably going to need to say that anybody seeing the show should not listen to this first.
Yes. Yeah, it's a much, I feel like the ideal experience of the show, of the performance, is coming in not knowing. Mm-hmm. So, because the work is dealing with the expectations of the viewer, of what is coming, sitting down as an audience, and what you see, what you expect. Mm-hmm. What do you expect to happen? How do you expect yourself to be as a viewer? Mm-hmm. And also what you know when you see work. I feel like when I go to see work, it begins, and as it begins, I start to form an opinion, or even unconsciously, I already start to form an opinion, or I already start to define a little bit what kind of work it is. Is it more theater? Is it abstract? Is it the aesthetic of it, what it's dealing with, what it's proposing? I already get, even if you're not processing it all very consciously, you're already getting all of that. So you then expect it to go a certain place. If you see, performance art a lot, you've already seen so much that you begin to categorize. Oh, this is this kind of work. This is this kind of work. So I feel like I prefer if people not know, and as they are dealing with how they assume what they assume this kind of work is, then they can be, hopefully, their perception can shift, and they can shift their ideas about what they're seeing, mm-hmm. or what they expect performance art to be.
Mm-hmm. And did that inform the title of the work?
Yes, very much. The title, OTRO TEATRO, is another theater or other theater. And I mean, it is the fantasy, because I think it's a tall order, mm-hmm. of creating a different kind of theater. Mm. Although I make dance, I'm very aware of that dance in itself as a form is not only dance in the context of theater. So I think of it as, when you put dance in a theater, you're making theater as a larger thing, as a performance. It's performance art, or it's in a theater. So there's social dance, folk dance. I mean, the dance in itself is much larger than putting a show on stage.
Right. So
I think of it as that history of what it means to ask people to come sit down and view a performing arts in the theater. So it has to do with this social contract and the history of that social contract. So making contemporary dance, to me, is partially about asking myself what it means to make dance in the theater now. What is it for? What is its value, its function? Why? And often, because I ask myself, why am I still doing this? Is so hard. And yeah, I don't want to forget that question and just get into a kind of formula and do it without questioning it.
Mm-hmm. And you also, in the performance, bring the theater alive, and dancers afterwards were commenting on how much the space vibrates and continues to vibrate after the performance has long ended. You've really made a character of the theater. and the architecture. So it's more than just the contract between the audience and who's performing, and those lines getting blurry and starting to kind of seep back and forth between how to participate in the social contract, but also then the setting, the theater, the proscenium, the way the lights are being used, you know, hiding the lights and then showing the lights and making the actual light design be a graphic design, and the layers of bringing our attention to the space.
Yeah.
And the instruments that are normally just meant for creating a product in an environment, but actually also revealing them.
Yeah, I think we worked really hard on trying to shift to deal with lighting, to shift that value also, so that the instrument that does the lighting can become something, an object, a valuable object in and of itself, rather than just having the purpose of the serving the dancer. And so it's not just an instrument shining light on this performer, but in it itself can become an object. And so creating a shape with the lights, creating a symbol is a kind of, it's this desire this experiment to see if it's possible to shift the way. That's one way of using the theater in an other way. So lighting to me represents the theater in many ways. It's kind of there's the actual space, like you were saying, the walls. That's why we do a lot of touching and making, like what I was talking about in the process was that the instrument, because there is no recorded sound, that the music it grows from the action, the movement that we do, but also that the instrument is the body of the theater in itself. It's our bodies and the body of the theater. So in a way, we're playing the theater as an instrument, because it itself has resonance and the surfaces. So it's kind of shifting, also thinking of the theater as a kind of an organic thing. And then in terms of the lighting, I feel like the lighting, I don't know how to say it in a very articulate way. The only way I can express it is that the lighting feels like the representation of the character if the theater were a character in a play. I mean, I don't know it's not a play at all, but or the roles, right? There's the performer, the bodies of the performer. The lighting is that the role of the theater. It's like the eyes of it's like in a movie, the camera lens is the eyes of the director, or it's you see through the camera lens. You're watching the movie as if you were watching through the eyes of the camera lens. So the lighting in theater to me is like the camera lens. And because, if you have work lights, there's no direction of the focus.
The work lights are more general, kind of wash light.
But it says something.
Space.
And it's not maybe, you could think of it as spatially very like, okay, you can have a lighting that's just one circle and it's shining on something and it's telling you, look at this, don't look at anything else. But if you have work lights, it's saying you're being told you can look at everything, but also you're being told there is no construct here. There's no artifice. It is what it is. It's just the theater, the space, the reality of the space. So in that way, I mean, the lighting conceptually I'm interested in it completely being in the same conceptual line as the work, and being able to speak so much to what the work is doing, I guess. So hiding the lighting instruments or only revealing them in a shape shifts the notion that this is just a frame for this thing we prepared for you.
Right.
And so it shifts the value in that way.
I was also thinking this, as you're talking, the lights being this presence, this spirit that's coming from, or the kind of the action that the theater can create.
Yeah.
To give it more personality, more character, more presence. And, it gives it almost like because it's so larger than life, it gives it a divine quality, and it has this presence that you could see the structure of this performance as being church-like, that there's a proposed topic and point of focus, and at the same time, just as valuable to be aware of your surroundings and who's with you, and honoring what they're experiencing, and giving yourself room to be yourself within that environment. Whereas in theater, we tend to not want to disrupt and be very quiet, and open up your lozenges, the wrappers beforehand, so that you don't make any noise.
Yeah.
There's no, one of the performers, as she became more and more taken into the choreography, she was seated next to an audience member, and he felt that, I don't know if you talked about this yesterday,
I heard a
but
couple
yeah,
things.
he felt like she was misbehaving as an audience member, and
Kept
tapping her to say, stop, you're making too much noise. You're moving around too much, not realizing that she had started to blur and shift into the choreography.
Yeah.
But in church, I don't think somebody next to you would say, stop looking in your bag, or, pay attention.
Yeah. I mean, it depends on what kind of church, in a way. I don't know, but yeah, I mean, I feel like I've always been interested in how dance is so experiential, yet first the way you experience it is visual, is through your eyes. That's the first thing you see, and how it feels. I mean, so the lighting and the visual, obviously the aesthetic of that is important and gives a lot to the audience, but it also separates an audience. I feel like an audience member can look at dance and just separate themselves from it and just experience it in just a visual way that is separate from a sense of their own body, what they're experiencing, like you were saying, and the energy in the room. And I feel like I'm just kind of fascinated as a performer when I walk on stage, and I feel all the eyes on me. What this charge, this tension of just standing and being expected to do something for them, and also feeling a kind of separation. So it's both like, I feel like this longing for just a communion of this moment. It feels like just being here together, we're honoring a history, and it's a kind of an homage to the history of doing this. Just the fact that we're getting together to be in a performing situation in a theater
And
together.
acknowledging that we are together.
Together, it's just the togetherness, first of all. It's just that simple thing. We're all together here. And so there's a kind of love potential. I think it's very idealist in a way, but I feel like there is that longing for, like, let's just get up and dance all together. Like, some part of me just wants to do that. And then also there's a kind of almost like confrontation to that gaze, and a responding to it, almost in not rejecting it, but it brings up some kind of anger. Also, what do you want from me, And then it brings up issues about, like, being a woman, being looked at, and brings on, I feel like just, as a performer, you're being objectified just by entering this, just by being on stage. So
regardless of your gender, but
regardless of your gender, but
as
for
a
me,
woman in
because
the
I am
society,
in, exactly, just because for my own experience being in a woman's body, it goes back to my relationship to the male gaze. But regardless of gender, I think as a performer, you're being objectified just by standing on stage. So a lot of this work for me was dealing with that. And in the past, I had dealt with it by a kind of returning the gaze or confrontation of that gaze, maybe in a more immature way, or I guess because I've done that already, I'm not so interested. So lately I've been covering myself as a way of trying to shift to not give that visual. So that lighting-wise, I mean, in other pieces I've done just a lot of darkness in the beginning. Here I'm covering myself and just trying to shift the energy of the room and myself rather than begin the entertainment or begin the show.
Right.
So that I don't...
try and meet somebody's expectations.
Exactly. So in a way I'm doing that. And I can see, I noticed some people walked out, someone I think walked out early into it at like 10 minutes, or I don't know how many minutes into it, when I was doing the turning, and when, it's very repetitive. And I think one of the performers told me that, Mahalchik told me, some lady was sitting in front of him and was saying, "This is not dance. What are they trying to bore us out of our mind?" And she left really early, and then I think she was with someone, and the other person stayed. They were interested in, she was on a date or something, I don't know, who knows. But she was really enraged and left, and the person that she came with stayed throughout.
Right.
And how, in a way, it made me, I get nervous too in terms of the expectations of the audience, that they're not going to stick it out and get more towards the end.
Right.
But I'm doing that not to provoke, because it's not like it hasn't been done before. So it's not like I feel like it's the first time something has not been entertaining or dancey in a showmanship kind of way. But I am interested in saying, hold on, this is not about just looking at a figure, or it's about not giving you the opportunity to objectify me yet.
Right.
It's not about looking at me. I'm not going to give you just this, okay, I'm here, a body moving in front of you. I'm actually interested in feeling the energy in the room, in resonating, bringing an energy into the space, in changing myself, and hopefully provoking a transformation in your experience of the room.
Right, and it
too.
takes time for an audience member
time,
who comes in expecting to be delivered something, for them to mourn that loss, to let go, and to empty to a place where you dig in.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it takes
time. And you
time.
commit to being open to what is happening. And it's one thing to say, come with an open mind, but we have so much prior experience and baggage and expectations around sitting in seats and facing front.
Facing front and being given something, and something to think about, either like a kind of eye candy or entertainment, or being given something to think about.
Right, even the logic, right. Yeah, I think that's something too, that you're dismantling, and at the same time, you're giving a lot of cues, but they're not hooks. You've talked about removing the author's imprint on the piece, and even though it's very clearly your work, that the values are what are moving the piece forward.
Yeah.
And not clever logic.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not like one idea, one really bright, clever concept that you perfectly, fulfill, and that once the audience gets it, then they're in on it, and we're all feeling very, how do you say, successful or not?
Satisfied.
Satisfied and accomplished, like you accomplished. You got it. So even very experimental or avant-garde, contemporary dance, I often, that I myself enjoy and I think, and I respect a lot, often is very smart, dealing with interesting ideas, questioning things about making work or about what is dance, but is a kind of a perfect packaged idea, and that one, as a viewer of contemporary dance and knowing art history, visual arts, and very educated, feels very satisfied that you get it. It's not Broadway, it's not, cheesy, but you get it. But I have a kind of rejection of that, although I also enjoy that work. And it seems always like often like smart European men tend to make a lot of that work. Not only, but that, like the ones that are the most well-known, I'm not going to name names, but, and I also enjoy that work. I think it's really important. But I have a kind of issue, I have issues with it because it's too one truth. It's not complicated. It's not, and I don't experience life that way. I don't feel like things are just like, oh, it's just that idea. And it's that thing that you were saying, that you get it and you understand what you're seeing, and it makes you feel like satisfied with yourself. And you're also understanding it intellectually. So I'm more interested in, although there's a lot of concept, and there's a lot of thinking involved in making in this work. I'm interested in more like shift in making it. I've tried to make it from a more instinctual place, because I'm making work. I tell myself, okay, if you're making work that is trying to shift values in society away from the intellectual being higher than the visceral or the instinctive or the feeling aspect of our life, then I should, practice that myself in making the work. And I battle with my intellectual self, and not that I think all intellect is bad either, but I battle with it myself, because that's when I question it. I feel like I have this like sense, an intuitive sense of it should go this way. And then I put the fabric to hide myself, and I wanted to do this repetitive kind of chanting thing. And right away I'm like, but looks like I look like an Arab woman. And then people are going to think burqa, and they're going to, so I consider that. But a lot of the things that I choose are not coming from like, I want to make a piece where people think that's a burqa or that's a ghost or that.
Right.
But as it comes up from a more like instinctual, intuitive, improvisatorial place, then I look at it and I question it. But I've let myself in this piece, I've let things happen, because even though some people are going to say, oh, it looks like she's speaking about Arab women's, and I'm not, but I am too. It comes up and it's interesting to me. Oh, that's interesting. That looks a little bit like that. And how I've been thinking of how screwed up it is that we're, becoming so racist towards the Middle East, and the way we're looking at people, that we don't even understand that culture from here, at least. And so I am. So
it's not about that, but it is about that.
But it is.
It can be.
It can be, and it is. And I have my relationship to that. I feel like, in a way, I don't want to appropriate. I'm not an Arab woman. I have no idea what that's like. But I know where I have a relationship to that, because it's one of those symbols that's becoming like an image that we see over and over in TV and the news. I mean, it's so not about that, the piece, but I'm just saying that's one little thing I noticed visually. Oh, that's
and there's room in the piece for someone to hear you, know, the moaning underneath the fabric, and to recognize you as a woman and see that shape and recognize that as a female struggle more generally, and not necessarily place it geographically or and be able to acknowledge where we are in history.
Yeah.
And to also let it kind of like surface and let go. There's room for that in the piece often, to have these moments surface and keep moving on instead of battling against it or promoting it.
Yeah.
It's just, we are in this together, and this is our common experiences with the news, with television, and the fabric. It's a dark, shimmery fabric, and it also grabs our attention. Not only the spinning, the covering that it enables, but it also has a sound to it. And what I noticed is, as you move, especially, the stairs in the theater have carpet, so that friction, now we become really sensitive to touch, and to sound, and to the space around us, and what sound does to space.
Yeah. No, that's why at some point in the process, I realized, because when I started, I knew I wanted to use voice, and I, as I'm rehearsing, I noticed this. These sounds are what are part of the process. They become this landscape, the soundscape of the work. But I started working with a composer, and I assumed I would have music. I love music, and there is music throughout. But this kind of adding music to a dance you make, as I was at some point in the process, it became apparent that this was it. This was the music. It was all these sounds, and that was more connected to the philosophy or the ideology of what I'm trying to do. Is this non-separation of music and dance? I was saying as a joke that I feel like I'm trying to do like the opposite of Cunningham, instead of this like chance encounter, that every sound is absolutely necessary and of the dance, instead of this. I mean, you could argue that it's kind of like John Cage, because he did the whole silence thing, that everything is music. So in this work, to me, everything is music. The movement, what we call the bucking, when the hitting of the wall, or and here in the theater, the fire curtain, the fire curtain thing, that sound is this beautiful sound that's like a bell almost. So it's that literal playing of the theater, and that the movement, you feel, it just makes you feel how, like when the drumming, how music comes out of a physical act too. Because, the guitar,
the body.
It's the body still. The guitar has the shape of the body. I mean, we don't have guitars, but, the playing of the movement creates, the fabric creates sound. It's kind of an obvious thing, but I feel like that's the way I'm going into I make work. Like I often make more movement, and then I kind of distill it, and only some of it remains. Because I'm always searching for a more essential connection to just what is the direct connection, and kind of an essential connection to the act of the need for, or the desire to dance, I guess, or and also the relationship of not trying to separate dance from just simply being in the body, so making movement instead of making a dance, again, as a kind of object or package to entertain. Or it's something about production too. I feel like making a dance phrase, and not to say that I don't respect and value other choreographers that do that, because I thoroughly enjoy that. But in this work, I've been trying not to make a dance phrase as a product, but making work against a value of productivity, but more about, that's why I wrote that and I handed it to people. That's what we've been dealing with in the process, is that what we're doing, I was hoping to, or not hoping, I think I did that. I can't find the word. I intended to. There's a word that I can't find. The purpose for making the work to me was to do something that isn't a production of something, but that is a growing of a body, is a shift of it, is a changing, that the movement that we do is to make oneself a new body. So I thought, I considered, is it possible to make a piece that where the dancer and performer is not a worker, a server to the work, so that it's not a process of producing something, and we are serving as performers, serving this vehicle, this kind of worker that creates this product to then serve to the audience, but rather to shift that thinking altogether and have a process that's a practice of making the body connected in the way we want to, or the way I want to, with the people I work with. We decide in the practice of doing it what kind of body, not that we write this kind of body, but by doing the practice, we create ourselves this kind of body. And in the performance moment, and that's what becomes the structure of the piece and the movements that we do. And then the moment of sharing with the audience is also that process of doing that, and hopefully inviting the audience to have that same way of being in the body.
I experienced, especially at opening night, I watched dress rehearsal and could feel the transformation because of the timing of the piece and how much space there is in the piece. And then with an audience last night, on opening night, the heightened sense of feeling in the space and how often I would feel chills, that it definitely has an energetic quality that goes into the audience and comes from the performers and back, and that this channeling of being so repetitive and letting the body produce, or rather let the sensations kind of permeate out through the body.
Yeah, it's like the movement produces something in you, but it's not like you do something.
You're not layering it on top of the body.
Yeah, it's not layering it on top. It's exactly. Yeah. And it's not. It's also I've always been interested in like the other piece that you had invited me to bring when you did the shared evening, where the dancers we were all wearing uniforms.
A supernatural return to love. Yeah.
And all that series of work that I made with dancers always wearing workers' uniforms was that grappling with that, the fact that it felt like the dancer is the labor of this art form, and how it's not unlike in society how the blue collar or the factory worker, the people that are in the lower social strata is more physical labor. Yeah. So that in itself shows the value of how that's lesser, and how the dancer is this labor of the body. So in this work, now I've been interested in dealing with pleasure, and although there is always labor, there is the work of dance. That's why I was saying I've been trying not to produce, in a way it has to do with a kind of issues of capitalism and questions about, is it possible to be in a society where what's valuable is not just producing something. I mean, I'm not saying that we're all like not doing anything, but this idea that it's all about this industrialization model that we've created, that it's about productivity, 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 and how dance, in a way, I realized that the relationships, the way dance works, the choreographer, the dancer, this model is of dance as a form. How you produce work in the dance world is not unlike a capitalist model. Mm-hmm. So if I'm interested in I feel like dance in a way is always going to be pushing against that system because it's about experience. It's not producing an object, so it's just
there's no commodity at the end of it.
Exactly. But on the other hand, I started to realize the more you're in it, the more you realize it actually is, because the dancer is the employee, it's the worker, and it's that began. So first I started making work where I was trying to show that. Mm-hmm.
The labor.
Mm-hmm. And now I gotten more interested in this OTRO TEATRO thing, mm-hmm. is the interest to, instead of just kind of complain about it or show that this is how it is, I'm more interested in trying, is it possible to be in another way?
Yeah.
You know, this
It definitely brings a utopian sensibility.
Yeah, there's a utopian thing to it,
yeah.
definitely. I mean, when all the bodies are on the floor, it's like 20-some mm-hmm. bodies on the floor doing that practice that we did the other day, uh-huh. of just being in your skin, uh-huh. letting the mind just melt down to your skin and just being kind of a sensor, as if your skin had just little sensors, and just experiencing texture and not placing knowing on what you're touching, but mm-hmm. just experiencing the sensuality and the pleasure of touching without thinking of it as the goal of mm-hmm. having sexual intercourse, for example. Right. Just being in that sensuality of mm-hmm. Being in a body. That's very utopian.
Mm-hmm. You're also displaying a discovery, because if you're not labeling an experience like, oh, I recognize that, I know that, I can relate that to something else, or intellectually assign it a meaning because of I know this, and it's, they relate, that sensing and not labeling, you're letting us as audience discover it with you. So in some ways, you become, as performers, an antenna, because you're not placing a defined, I'm feeling the ground and it is sensual.
Yeah.
I am in a sensing place. I happen to be on the ground. I happen to run into someone. And that meeting, that discovery, lets us discover at the same time, because that's what we're doing. We're visually discovering, and then the empathetic ability of an audience to be in their body, and the time with this performance where you're letting them kind of seep into the process.
Yeah, I guess that's why it takes time. I mean, I didn't intend to make a long piece.
Uh-huh. And it's not that long. It's an hour, 2.5 hours.
Yeah. I mean, now I think, it's not long enough. Because at some point I thought, wow, this is becoming so durational. I think it might be 3 hours or more.
Yeah.
And now that, I realize it's just not even 2.5 hours. Well, it depends on if you go all the way to the end of the taping and the very end.
Yeah.
I guess that's 2.5 hours.
Mm-hmm.
But the house lights come on just a few minutes after 2 hours, so you could choose to leave. Right. I guess. Hopefully not.
Yeah, because the piece still unfolds, and the kind of we see with your solo performance throughout that you're able to, channel and be very emotive, and at the same time just walk up the stairs to get to another place. Like there's a dropping of character that we see at the end, after the bodies are sensing and feeling on stage, and the lights shift, signaling completion.
Yeah.
And as the the performers pick up rolls of tape and start to create this design that we see around us right now, they're able to remain very vulnerable. And at the same time, let go of more of a trance-like state.
Yeah. Yeah, I was interested in kind of slipping out of performance because, like I was saying before, that relationship with the viewer as a performer, in the whole piece I've been working with the dancers and for myself trying to just be in the practice that we've been doing. So to try to bring that practice of the process of being, the practice of being in pleasure and kind of this empowering, this growing of a body that feels very empowered in being and that allows itself to be in pleasure without just making the labor of making a dance, but just making a dance that's about being in a certain way in your body and connected in a certain way. That relationship to being a performer shifts when someone's watching you do that, feels very self-indulgent, like I'm just being in my body.
Sure.
And it can be also very easily objectified. So there's a lot of nudity and a lot of rippling and things that are thought of as sexy or sexual that can easily make you
flirtatious.
feel. Yeah. So I think the action of taping, the task of taping isn't unlike that, because it's just being involved in a task, involved in building something. And the difference is the taping of the floor, the shifting of the visual, the drawing together in the theater is a communal task. To me, that idealist, like the rest of the piece, in this ideal sense of that the end is just that we're not performing for anyone, we're just doing something, we're creating something together. We're putting tape on the floor and drawing together. And hopefully by then, it seemed like some people did start to do it, so that it's just a calling of, it's not the show's over, clap for me, thank you, goodbye. It's more slipping out of performance even more and just doing a communal task, a participatory thing. Because in a way, like we've talked about before, that I have this conflict of where I think ideally, I think everything should be a collective. In a sense, I feel like ideally where we are now, every art, visual art, even performative act should just be a participatory experience. And there's a lot of work out there that's like that these days. So I really connect to that, but I'm still interested. I have this thing where like, absolutely, I'm right there with you. It should just all be just participatory things. But on the other hand, I still am interested in creating this construct of theater, and I'm still interested in making dances and moving. And so it's kind of like dealing with both, or the edge of how can you, during a constructed theatrical experience, shift towards participation. I guess that's
hugely courageous of you too, to be coming back to the body on stage and addressing gaze and empowering a female body and doing it naked and taking time and being able to do it in a very I want to say loving, but it's more just accepting. That I know as an audience it's going to take you some time to feel what I'm feeling, so I'm going to just keep doing this and model that behavior and keep it consistent, so that those who feel comfortable kind of letting their brain melt into their cells and their skin, that they don't necessarily know that that's part of the dancer's directions and your practice, but they can start to feel a shift.
I mean, that's part of the reason why I decided to give out that text in the beginning.
Do you remember a little bit what it says on it?
To grow ourselves a new body, to give our bodies a voice, to, I don't remember if it's to do the practice or be in the practice of pleasure, the practice of being in pleasure, of creating a new, I mean, I wrote it, but to create ourselves a new body, a utopian body, an anarchic body, a magical body. I mean, I've written and rewritten that several times. So, but then it says something with a mind that has melted down to our flesh, our skin, our gut.
And you also talk about a plant.
Yeah, to grow oneself a new body like one grows a plant.
So that in some ways it's very common.
Yeah.
You're not proposing something that is otherworldly, you know. To equate it to a plant is like, oh, it's really simple actually.
Yeah. And it's the thing, like, that's why I do a lot of that kind of, in a way, it's a dance, but it's also kind of a practice of this symmetrical movement of connection of the connective tissue, and it's very specific, but it's improvised. So and everyone then comes in and repeats, goes through that, the rippling spine that grows into these ripples. So it is a kind of growing, like I mean, I haven't studied Feldenkrais, but in Feldenkrais they do that a lot, of following pleasure and a connection and just repeating it. And that way you undo patterns that are unhealthy or hurtful. Or limiting. And you create, you literally recreate and build paths of connection in your body. So the growing, there's a metaphoric kind of poetic quality to that idea of growing oneself a body like a plant, but there's also an anatomically tissue-like reality to it. That's something I've gotten obsessed about lately with when I started teaching dance more. It's what is technique and how when you see a ballet dancer, they do have a certain kind of body. A Cunningham dancer is a Cunningham body. A bodybuilder is a kind of body, a yoga body. There is a growing of oneself, a body, depending on what your practice is.
Right.
So creating a technique, or what I realized when I started teaching dance and I wanted to make exercises to have people do them, is that it was so conflicting because it felt almost to be dramatic and extreme fascist. Because when I see a ballet body, it's like you see how even a Trisha Brown, a postmodern release body, which at first I studied and I thought it was the most beautiful thing in the world, I started realizing, because it's all about direction and the bone, there's a look and a kind of body that gets created. Just like the bodybuilder, it's all about force and external force. So it's like, but this internal connection that is energetic, that it's more, what I've learned, I haven't started Qigong, but from the practices I do, I've learned that I do have some relationship to what I do that is very similar to Qigong and other practices. But what I realized in teaching dance is that I was more interested in a kind of anarchic body, a body that it doesn't have one idea of truth, but it's more about following. It's this not leading, not decide, not making a exact exercise that's going to make yourself a body and train your body. So the idea of, I have conflicts with the idea of training, because in a way it's molding your body into a way of a certain model of truth and perfection and beauty. So this other way of feeling your connective tissue and following this kind of paths, there's a kind of natural, each of us has their own spirals and turns that our connective tissue does. And instead of trying to retrain them and make them even or make them do a certain thing, kind of following them, and I guess it's a more anarchic view of it. But anarchy, I don't mean like anarchy. What I've learned lately more is not just whatever and chaos. It's more if if you're deeply connected and responsible and sensitive to others and connected to yourself, then ideally it's a very utopian thing, anarchy in a way. the society, that we don't need a hierarchy. Sorry, I'm like
Right.
teaching.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't mean to teach. It's not like I know that much about anarchy, but I mean, I just want to clarify, because I feel like when you throw the word anarchy out there,
there's
people
baggage
just,
attached. And
there's this baggage of like, anarchy is whatever, no rules, destruction, chaos, mayhem. And there is some of that in the piece, is trying to find that order within this freedom, or not order, but a kind of natural order that there is in a more freedom state, that it's not so overly designed by the author. What you were saying is that taking away of the value of the author a little bit is not wanting to control everything. That's the kind of thing, in that way I connect to anarchy, in this way of the power of the government. Not that I'm a libertarian at all, please don't think that. No. But you know, this idea that it's kind of patriarchal idea that you need this father figure to tell you what's best for you. That I'm hoping that it's more, if we are more responsible and empowered, then we don't need so much that father figure. Definitely not the father figure, maybe more mother figure.
Yeah, yeah. And going back to the practice and the training, in some ways I see the practice as facilitating a letting go of inhibitions. That there may not be an aesthetic alignment, but there is an ease to get into the body and to be able to let go of inhibitions and tap into what is already in our body that we've pulled ourselves out of by being so cerebral in society. But to and the unsocializing that you've talked about a lot.
Yeah, it's to listen more to. I guess it's that joining, that mind-body joining of the mind-body, and even in practices, in practices, in technique, in certain dance techniques, or ways in which we make dances, it feels to me that we still are valuing more the direction of the mind to the body. And that's why I've moved more towards a practice of seeing if you can follow, if you can listen, literally listen to your flesh, to your energy in your organs, in your fluid. It sounds very, but I think it actually, when you connect to that, there's an immense power in it, a strength, a power, and I think a beauty in a way of moving, because there's the connection to gravity that I've studied a lot, and I think is beautiful in Release postmodern dance. As a good, best, or one of the most beautiful examples of it is like the Trisha Brown Company. But I am interested in a kind of beyond that there's all these other aspects to the body, right? The flesh, the organs, the fluids, the sex. There's a big thing in this piece to me, was like allowing myself to go all the way to pleasure and sensuality and being sexual and saying yes to that. And I when we did a showing in a college in Vermont, there was a bit of a controversy with the students, because a lot of them thought it wasn't feminist, the piece, because they thought that I was objectifying the dancers. Although I guess you could say I objectify myself.
Because you're in the piece as well.
Because of being naked and being sexual. And it's kind of, I was trying to explain it a little bit, and I think it has to do with this idea that feminism is being just completely, because in our society we're so objectified sexually as women, not only women, but mostly, that then being sexual on stage is objectifying yourself.
It's playing into that.
It's playing into that. And I feel like you were saying that I'm asking people to take time and to look at this is the same thing. I mean, I do that thing in the corner where I spread my legs, and there's something that people have seen as a stripper or as a pornographic thing, but I feel like I'm trying to reclaim it and shift the meaning of that. Because a woman spreading their legs is not only porno.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
It can be a beautiful thing. I mean,
Yeah.
it feels extremely empowering to me to do it. It feels, it's vulnerable, but I feel like I'm trying to call for a empowerment through being vulnerable and taking back those images of women like that in a way.
And it's, you know, it's vulnerable because of the definitions in society, and being this piece's utopian nature, those shouldn't apply, and that's why it has the room for those, you know, just like the burqa images, or, you know, that yes, it's about that, and at the same time it's not about that.
Yeah.
Of course that's going to come up because it's a society we live in, but that's
but
not
of
what
course
this is
I
about.
hope that people, my hope is that it comes up, but then it's that and it isn't, and it's also something else, so that meaning keeps shifting.
Yes.
So that you can't fixate on one meaning. Like you were saying, okay, you're looking at something, you know what it is, and you decide it's that, or that's what this piece means. And to me, it's more interesting to see that meaning, and then see that it can also, that it can be, objectified image and objectified woman spreading their legs, and then it shifts to looking like a creature, like an animal, and then it shifts to, I don't know,
just a sensing.
Sensing, and it just keeps shifting. Your mind goes into references of symbol, and your mind attaches meaning, but at the same time you're having an experience, so kind of it weaves in and out of that. I'm hoping.
Yeah,
it seems
no, I
like
think so. Yeah, the body then has already been kind of primed in a way to acknowledge, I see that, but I can also know that I'm feeling something different.
Yeah.
I think it's working. It's a great piece.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's been the hardest thing I've ever made. So much work.
Yeah.
But
well, we're lucky to have you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's beautiful being here. It's been great, and working with the people here. It's just, it feels like just more like expanding the practice beyond that, just a little group of people.
Rippling it out.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
I'm glad we could offer that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Thank you.